To rationalists, scientists do not think in a rational way. To be a rationalist means that you always seek rational and logical solutions. Scientists do not. No rationalist would ever reach for randomness to explain anything, because randomness is exactly the absence of rational explanation. In so many ways, it is synonymous with miraculous. A rationalist seeks a rational cause for the Big Bang. Scientists see no need for a rational cause. They are perfectly willing, eager even, to accept the Big Bang as having been randomly initiated. That doesn't cause them any pause for thought at all. In fact, all too often, scientists actively seek out explanations like this. There is a simple reason for this. They are extremely motivated not to seek out any alternative explanations that would suggest intelligence, design, forethought, meaning, purpose, i.e., anything that smacks in any way of God. That includes cosmic consciousness, anything suggestive of mind. Minds act with purpose. That's what defines them. They are entities that strive for meaning, power, understanding, knowledge, goals, and so on. Matter is purposeless. It doesn't seek anything. So, materialists are ideologically committed to removing purpose, teleology, from explanation. Their paradigm requires it. Science, these days, has no requirement for events to have reasons or causes. The modern scientific mind is extremely happy with randomness, probabilities, and statistics. Nothing happens for an actual reason. Things happen because they are possible, although possibility is never defined in science, merely asserted, have a probability associated with them, and any event with a non-zero probability can be randomly selected. The more probable the event is, the more likely it is to be selected, but there is nothing to stop extremely improbable events from being selected. They are simply statistically less likely. People who think in this kind of way do not look for analytic reasons or causes. They have no interest in such things. They are happy for things just to randomly occur, without reasons, without causes. They have no problem with that. In fact, it makes perfect sense to them. Because, of course, it's the perfect way to get rid of meaning, purpose, intelligence, design. Randomness is the perfect partner for meaningless matter and the perfect way of getting rid of God or mind. Scientists seem oblivious to the fact that they are paradigmatically motivated to think in a certain way, a way incompatible with reason and logic. Scientists will always push synthetic arguments rather than analytic arguments. They will always look to the a posteriori and reject the a priori. They use induction, not deduction. They refer to particulars and reject universals. They focus on content, not form. They look to truths of fact, not truths of reason. They concentrate on matters of fact, not relations of ideas. They are always convinced by the senses, and never by reason and logic. They worship the parts and reject holism. They support bottom-up thinking and reject top-down thinking. They have no interest in first principles, in completeness and consistency. They always choose correspondence over coherence. They always reject mind and always believe in matter. They loathe teleology and seek to abolish it. They are eager to portray reality as meaningless, purposeless and pointless, as a stupendous random accident. They always pay attention to empirical evidence and reject everything else. LLT wrote, "Demonstrate a mind without a brain using empirical evidence. Till you do that, you got nothing. The rest of this noise is just that, noise." Do you see how this argument proceeds by way of paradigmatic assertion? LLT is an empiricist and materialist, so he will not accept any argument that does not proceed by empiricist and materialist means. Rational and logical proofs are instantly rejected by him. He is not interested in them at all. And this goes for all scientists. A rationalist accepts a rational proof as definitive, and is extremely unconvinced by speculative empirical claims. So, for example, the fanatical empiricist philosopher David Hume rejected causation on the exact grounds that there was no empirical evidence for it. No one can perceive causation. A rationalist, by contrast, understands that causation must exist in order for the world to be as it is, to function as it does. Causation is not explained empirically, it is explained rationally, and these are two totally different modes of explanation. Someone such as LLT associates the brain with the mind purely because he can see the brain and can't see the mind. Although he can offer no explanation at all of how mindless matter can produce mind, he can't observe mindless matter generating mind, any more than he can observe causation. He nevertheless accepts the brain as the mind, because he paradigmatically has nowhere else to go. He can't refer to anything immaterial or non-empirical. So, people such as LLT cannot in any way demonstrate with empirical evidence that the brain is the mind, but they imagine they can. You cannot open a person's skull and look at their brain and see mind. You can't see thinking taking place. You can't see someone having subjective experiences. There is literally zero empirical evidence that the brain is the mind. If Hume could reject causation because he couldn't perceive it, then, by his own logic, he would have to reject the brain as mind since he couldn't perceive that it was. The brain is just a physical organ, a bunch of mindless atoms. Where is there any sensory evidence that it is the mind? But LLT imagines that it is somehow proven that the brain is the mind, and he taunts others to show empirical evidence that it is not, even though he has literally zero empirical evidence that it is. He infers that it is, but inference is not accepted by empiricists. Hume could have inferred that causation existed via the way the world functions, but his empiricist fame rests on the fact that he refused to accept rational inference over empirical perception. In that case, if mind cannot be perceived when looking at the brain, why would any empiricist infer that the brain is the mind? The problem for people such as LLT is that he doesn't even grasp empiricism, let alone rationalism. Leibniz wrote, "It must be confessed, however, that perception, and that which depends upon it, are inexplicable by mechanical causes, that is to say, by figures and motions." Supposing that there were a machine whose structure produced thought, sensation, and perception, we could conceive of it as increased in size with the same proportions until one was able to enter into its interior, as he would into a mill. Now, on going into it, he would find only pieces working upon one another, but never would he find anything to explain perception. It is accordingly in the simple substance, and not in the compound nor in a machine, that the perception is to be sought. Furthermore, there is nothing besides perceptions and their changes to be found in the simple substance. And it is in these alone that all the internal activities of the simple substance can consist. So, Leibniz, a brilliant rationalist, showed how laughable LLT's argument is. Even if you magnified a human brain to the size of a house and walked through it and inspected every part of it and all of the different ways in which it functions, you would never empirically encounter mind, thought, the unconscious, consciousness, subjectivity, free will. Empiricism doesn't prove shit. It's total anti-knowledge. It relies on induction and inference, but, as Hume showed, induction doesn't prove anything. A black swan can pop up at any time, and inference has no place in empiricism. If you can't perceive it, you have no right, in empiricism, to refer to it. If all scientists were like Hume, proper empiricists, there would be no science at all. Scientists wouldn't be allowed to use mathematics, a supposedly unreal, man-made abstraction, hence nothing to do with the empirical facts of the real world. Without mathematical inference, science is impossible. But scientists aren't like Hume. They are like LLT. They are constantly inferring and assuming, in total contradiction of their own paradigm. It's hilarious for LLT to demand that others empirically show that the mind is not the brain when he cannot empirically show that the mind is the brain. He assumes it is because his entire paradigm is based on such assumptions, even though not one of them is empirically demonstrated. No random event has ever been empirically demonstrated. Events have been observed which have been interpreted as being based on randomness, but this is merely an inference, and rationalists can advance totally different inferences that never once refer to randomness. You see, the terrible problem with scientists is that they just can't think. They are people of religious faith in materialism and empiricism. The trouble is that they have no philosophical understanding of materialism or empiricism, and they are not even aware of the philosophy of idealism and rationalism, yet they go around pontificating and sermonizing as if they have some clue what they are talking about. They don't. They are ignoramuses, exactly as you would expect of people who loathe reason and logic and swear by the deceptive, delusional senses. Wouldn't it be great if the empiricists applied the Cartesian method of doubt to their beliefs? Descartes was of course a rationalist. LLT, everything you believe in, everything you swear by, is just noise. You fail to demonstrate anything with your empiricism. If science didn't use mathematics, the functional opposite of empiricism, wholly analytic and a priori with no connection to the empirical scientific method, it would literally be useless. So, LLT, demonstrate empirically that science can survive without non-empirical mathematics. Good luck with that. The brain is to the mind as science is to mathematics. You cannot have the former without the latter. The latter is the foundational component. You cannot debate with scientists why they think the way they do, why they reject more rational and logical ways of thinking. They are prisoners of ideological dogmatism. They are anti-intellectuals who hate philosophy, and that means they are unable to engage in clear, analytic, critical thinking. They never think deeply. They refuse to think deeply, dismissing it as mere philosophy. Shut up and calculate. Scientists think wrongly. That's because they reject all of the ways of thinking associated with rationalism, the correct way of thinking. Instead, they worship empiricism, which isn't about thinking at all, but about sensing. Scientists are always sensing types, but never thinking types. That's why they are anti-intellectuals. They are people of the body, not of the mind. That's their defining problem, the trap they are incapable of escaping. They are locked forever inside Plato's cave, the cave of dogmatic ignorance, caused by an inability to question sensory evidence. They are motivated to think wrongly because it accords with their psychological type, always privileging the senses over reason and logic. They are people of faith, not of reason. Reason never persuades them. That's why, like LLT, they always demand sensory evidence, the only thing they ever find convincing, just as Protestants only find Bible quotes convincing and dismiss reason as the devil's whore. Science is to mathematics as Protestantism is to Catholicism, an irrational protest against reason, based on faith.